Okay, man. Okay, what is this? What are you doing? Who are you?
I'm your judge and jury. And if necessary, I'm your executioner.
You're crazy! What the hell are you? You're a robot. You're a damned robot.
No, Ringerman. I'm a ghost story.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and today I am welcoming a returning guest to talk about a little-known TV movie from 1990 called The Dark Avenger, and the guest today is Brad Mengel. Brad, how you doing?
Not too bad. I think I'm the hipster of the superhero cinephiles. You know, I was doing this back in the 70s, and you wouldn't know this obscure little movie.
You know what? It is funny because back when we started this show, me and Derek, like, he was the one who would come up with all these like obscure movies, and anytime I tried to think of something that I thought he would have never thought of, he's like, oh yeah, I've seen that. But yeah, so before we get too much into the movie, it's been a while since we've had you on the show, so why don't you remind people who you are, what you do, all your secret origin story and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm a longtime pulp fan, writer, author. I do fiction, non-fiction. So I've done a companion book for the Mummy series. I've done an Australian superhero pulp adventures novel called Australis Incognito. Yeah, Incognito. And and just a bunch of short stories. I'm just working on a non-fiction piece at the moment and got asked to contribute to a couple of anthologies just recently. Nothing I can talk about at the moment.
Okay, that was going to be my next question.
If I was smart, I'd come on when I've got something, when I'd have something to promote.
Well, can you give us some inkling of what this stuff is, like at least genre-wise or anything along those lines?
Yeah, well, actually, strangely enough, one's non-fiction, the other's fiction, and they're both related to H.P. Lovecraft. So that's kind of, it's sort of like, well, I was going to do a deep dive, do a bit of a dig into Lovecraftian stuff for one, so it sort of helps out with the other.
Okay, cool. All right, that's very cool. So, hopefully by the time, by the time people listen to this, I think it'll be January is when we've got this on the schedule. So, guys, if that stuff is out by then, check out the links to Brad's stuff in the show notes and see if he's got any updates about that stuff. Hopefully, there'll be some more information by the time this episode goes live. But before we jump into the movie, what's interesting you lately? What kind of things have grabbed your attention these days?
Oh, geez, all sorts of things. I've just discovered a obscure comic book character called Captain Gravity. He's an African American, I guess, pulp era superhero who gets this magic element that gives him the power to control gravity. So that went for about 10 or 11 issues. So just started to go through them at the moment. I went to our local comic convention, Supernova, and Martin Cove was there, and I got him to sign my copy of Black Scorpion, which we talked about in the past.
Oh, very cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. It was great. I was the one guy with the non-Karate Kid stuff, so you could almost see his eyes light up like, oh, yes, people recognize I did other things.
That's an interesting transition because I was going to say my thing I was going to talk about is I just finished part 2 of season 6 of Cobra Kai, which he is he's one of the, and he's doing a great job in that. And so when you said Martin Cove, I'm like, oh, this ties in perfectly. But yeah, we just finished that. I mean, that series, I don't know. I am hard pressed to think of a series that does a better job with such a ridiculous concept, and B, with the cliffhangers, because these episodes, they're only like 30 minutes, and change or something like that. And and they're so bingeable because, you know, my wife and I were watching. It's like, oh, let's go through one more. Let's go through one more. And we actually had to stop ourselves, say like, well, let's save the last two for tomorrow because it's already getting kind of late.
Yeah. Well, my
But
problem is because all of our family watch it, it's getting all three of us there at the same time to
yeah,
watch it.
I imagine I can foresee that becoming a difficulty with my family as well. But and just like the ridiculous concept, because when you think about it, when you really sit down and think about it, you have a bunch of these middle-aged men and older who are absolutely obsessed with high school karate tournaments.
Yeah, and look, Martin Cove is 82. And it's like, and he's still obsessed about this high school karate tournament from the 80s.
Exactly. Yeah, it is it is so well, I guess it's not that ridiculous. You hear all these stories about these, you know, little league dads and stuff like that. So, I guess it's not that ridiculous when you think about it from that way, but to me at least, it feels like a ridiculous concept, but they do such a good job with it. And the
Oh yeah,
characters are so well done.
there's probably a few people in the Hatfields and the McCoys going, 40 years, that's rookie numbers.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so we did mention the title of today's movie. This is Dark Avenger.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with any Marvel related Avengers stuff, or not to be confused with what the Thunderbolts movie may or may not be. This is completely unrelated. As far as I can see, this is not based on any existing IP. And this was, and guys, I tried to look up some information to get some background information on this, but there is nothing. I don't know
Oh,
where this thing came from, but there is like zero information about it. Every single piece of information I can find, it's just like a repeat. It's just like a copy and paste of the Wikipedia article. There's nothing else about it out there. But it came out on October 11th, 1990. It was aired on CBS as a pilot for a TV show, but the show was not picked up by the network, which for good reason, I think.
yeah.
And the only other information we have about it is the critical reception. So Kim Newman of Empire gave it a 3-star rating, says that it has several more plot twists up its sleeve than you'd expect. The script is refreshingly peppered with sharp lines and short on sentiment. And Jim Manchester of Comic Books, Movies, and Superheroes, which is a blog site, said, it seems like the filmmakers attempted to make a Norrish vigilante film with some interesting cinematography and editing. The movie can't be saved from bad writing, terrible acting, and worse directing. Which I probably lean a little bit more towards Manchester's opinion than Newman's personally. But
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I'm probably a little more in Newman's camp myself. Yeah, I tend to be very forgiving of these bad things.
I try to be, like, I really do try to
Yeah.
be, but there's just and you know, and we'll get into this as we talk about the movie, but for
Yeah.
me the greatest sin that one of these superhero movies can have is if it's boring. Like, that is the greatest sin for me.
Yeah.
If it's cheesy, if it's kishy, but it's got like an entertainment value, I am much more forgiving of it. And I say all the time, like, I am a defender of Batman and Robin because I see it as an update of Batman 66, and when you look at it in that vein, it's really kind of fun.
Oh
And
yeah,
you know, Uma
definitely.
Thurman is a camp goddess in that movie. but but something like this, and there are some moments, like, I will give it
Mm.
to, I'll talk a little bit about Maggie Han and her part in
Yep.
this, but there are some moments in this, but overall, it just drags a lot, is what I felt. Like,
Yeah.
it clocks in at less than 90 minutes, just I think it's like 89 minutes or
Yeah.
something like that, and
Something like that. Yep.
you feel every second of that 89 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. The interesting thing I found was it was actually on. Slotted in on the Flashes, the 1990 Flash TV series time slot. So they basically went, here's the pilot of the Flash, here's the second episode of the Flash, and then a week later they showed this, and then they just kept going with the Flash. So I don't know why there was like the Flash took a 1 week break and they said, oh, let's just air this. So
Yeah, that's
yeah.
interesting. I'd be curious about what if it was like, you know, if they're trying to figure out. maybe they were trying to choose. Maybe they only had the budget for one superhero show, or they're only
Yeah,
willing to invest the budget in one superhero show, and they just kind of went, let's see how both of these work. My guess
yeah,
is
maybe.
because this is 1990, so right after Tim Burton's Batman is maybe, I'm guessing, like, and again, I am basing this pure on speculation because there's zero information out there about this, but
Yeah,
my assumption based on what you just said is what probably happened is the network probably said, Batman is really big. You have all this Batmania stuff. Let's make a Batman-esque, let's make a superhero TV show, a Batman-esque TV show. And you
yeah,
probably had some people that said, well, we've got the rights for the Flash, so why don't we
yeah,
do the Flash? And they're like, oh, the Flash is a little bit too it's not really the same vein as Batman and all that. I'm not so sure if that'll work. So then they said, well, let's try doing this other pilot as well. We'll put them both up
yeah,
and see which one's more successful, and the more successful one will go to series. Is what I could envision having happened
yeah.
here.
Well, also the Flash was a very expensive show. The special effects were quite expensive, from what I understand. Like the ratings were fine, but it was just cost too much for them to make. Was the reason I heard back in the day was why they cancelled it. And the other factor is Darkman came out. The marketing started in June 1990, and the movie premiered on the 24th of August 1990. And this aired like in October, so you're only looking at 2 months later.
And there was a Darkman pilot floating around there at that time, around that time too. It would have been shortly after.
1992.
92. Okay.
Yeah, I've did all my notes. I also find interesting it had a couple of alternate titles. One of them was I Accuse, and the other one was Metal Face in West Germany. And I do kind of like the West German one.
I mean,
but yeah, I Accuse is a really bad name, really bad
yeah,
title.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Dark Avenger is very generic, but I still think it's better than Metal Face. It's it's a little bit too on the nose, and
Oh yes,
I Accuse is just bad.
Oh, definitely. Like yeah, you look at Dark Avenger, you look at the cover, and you go, yeah, look, I know exactly what I'm in for here. I Accuse could be anything.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, or even just like, The Judge or something like that would have been,
Yeah.
a little bit more appropriate for this. But yeah, it is a very generic title. Now I had never even heard of this movie before you sent me an email about it. So what is your history with this film?
Well, I'm not sure if you have a similar tradition, but in Australia, when you finish year 12, your senior year, there's a thing called schoolies. So they take a week off and everyone goes down the coast and parties. And because I'm a massive nerd, I didn't. I just went for a week away. And I went to the local video shop and probably hired everything that they had. And I found this on the shelf. And I'm like, oh, I love Darkman. I love the Batman 89. I saw this and I went, what is this? I've got to watch this. And yeah, it was great. I loved it. At the time, watching it now a little bit later, there's a few things I'm going, well, maybe they could have done better. But yeah, that was my introduction. A few years later, actually bought a copy of the video cassette. I don't think it's ever had a Blu-ray release or DVD release. So thankfully, someone put it on YouTube.
Yeah, I would be very surprised if this had gotten a DVD release or something like that. It does not seem like it ever did. I did see some when doing some research. I did see a bunch of like VHS images online, and
yeah,
it does look like it did get some releases. And I saw a lot of like Region 2 releases with like the Region 2 rating on it. So it possible it got a DVD in the UK or something like that, but or even maybe in Hong Kong, but I didn't see anything other than that. And this is probably one of those things. If not on YouTube, it might also be like on the Plex free TV service too. They've got a lot of this kind of stuff on there. I know when you're on talk about the Black Scorpion movie, the TV show was on Plex at that point. I'm not sure if it still is. So a lot of this stuff does end up on those free streaming sites like Tubi or anything like that. But like you said, it's also freely available on YouTube. That's how I watched it as well. And one of the things that reminded me of is first off, yeah, it did. I did get the Darkman vibes very much so, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Darkman comparisons I made. But it also reminded me of there were a few different like these kind of like done in one TV movie superhero projects that were on network TV around in the 90s. One of them that sticks out in my mind was called Model by Day. I'm not sure if you've ever seen this one.
No, is that got Famke Janssen in it? I've heard
Yes,
about
it's
it.
got Famke Janssen in it, and it's apparently she has said that it's the only film she's ever done that she's embarrassed by. But I saw it when I was like, in elementary school, so I thought it was so cool
Yeah,
because it was
yeah,
it was a superhero thing on network TV and live action. You almost never saw that stuff except for, and then you had the Mantis, which was probably that was kind of like the pinnacle of stuff we had in the 90s was the Mantis
yeah,
TV show, which definitely had its fair share of problems. Or Lois and Clark, which also had its fair
yeah,
share of problems because this was back in the era when you know people
yeah,
talk about the CW shows and how they have like kind of like a cheese factor to them or that kind of thing, but it's nothing compared to what they had at Lois and Clark or Mantis back in the day.
yeah, yeah. Look, I tend to give older things a little bit of a pass. It's like, well, look, I'm not when I watch the 1970 Captain America movie, I'm not expecting the first Avenger level stuff. I go, look, this is a TV movie that's probably had the you know made on a shoestring in about 5 minutes. So I tend to give these things a little bit more grace.
I'm forgiving of a lot of like the effects and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I am forgiving a lot of that stuff, but when it comes to the writing and the performances, that's when I become a little bit more critical because
yeah,
they could have done better in a lot of this stuff,
yes.
and
They don't cost anything as such. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So they could have done better with a lot of this stuff, but one of the first, well, before we jump into deeper into my thoughts, what were kind of your thoughts rewatching this?
Look, I could, I'm sort of watching it and my brain's sort of going, here's a few bits and, like, oh, look, that's like the Green Hornet, and that's like the Shadow, and that's like, so, I could see a lot of the influences coming in. And, Frank Lupo, who wrote it, was born in 1955. So, he would have been, 11 when the Batman TV series came out. He would have been there for a lot of those pulp TV shows reprints were happening. So I suspect that he had that sort of pulp backing. And he created like the A Team and Hunter, Raven, Wise Guy, Werewolf, Riptide. And he worked on the Painkiller Jane TV series and the Greatest American Hero. So he had he had a fair bit of a background there, I think, to do those type of to draw on those references. Um, there was I felt that the plot was a bit disjointed. We sort of had like this little 20-minute segment with the witness whose brother had been kidnapped and the trial, and then we sort of go, oh yeah, we've now got to go to our main plot, which is the Grim Reaper, and that was a little bit disjointed, to say the least. Um, yeah, and I suspect had they gone to series, we would have seen more of Robert Vaughn's Commissioner.
That was one of the things I was thinking too. Is the whole thing with the Grim Reaper? It's like this. It's like it just takes like a complete 90-degree turn out of nowhere, and like you're
Oh
like
yeah,
halfway into it, and I wondered, did they just kind of like have these? Did they actually have? Was this actually originally supposed to be like two separate episodes, and they just kind of like Frankenstein them together because it is very disjointed the way it just suddenly takes a curve.
well, even the opening credit, you've got this woman jogging with her dog, and we presume the Dark Avenger walks past her. We don't really, we just see a guy in a trench coat walk past, and then she gets startled by another jogger, and she just goes, "Well, that's it, I'm out of here." And that was her for the movie. Like I was thinking, well, is she going to be a victim of the Grim Reaper? But I don't think she ever turned back up. I'm like, why?
I completely forgot about that jogger in the beginning, but you're right. That it's just like I don't know. It's very, very strange the way they did this. But one of the things that did surprise me was some of the names that popped up in this. Like
Oh,
the first thing I wrote in my notes is Ken Jenkins is in this. I am a huge Scrubs fan, and I loved
yes.
Ken Jenkins as Dr. Kelso in that show. So
Yes.
when he popped up in this, I was just like, whoa. So that was the first thing I noticed. And also then we had some other people like, you mentioned the Reaper, Colin Tremaine, who's played by Greg Henry, who played Star-Lord's grandfather in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Robert Vaughn, you already mentioned, he plays the commissioner. And you've also got Hector Elizondo, who plays this corrupt police captain who's working with the commissioner. But even Thora Birch, this is like one of her first roles.
Yeah, it's like a fourth role.
Yeah. So yeah, there are a
Who
lot
did
of
the makeup.
Who?
Rick Baker.
That name sounds familiar. You have to refresh my memory.
He did like American Werewolf in London.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he's like a big name in the special effects field.
Yeah, I guess even I guess even he can't do wonders with such a limited budget because I mean, one of the things that drove me nuts was so the Dark Avenger, this let's give kind of so people are listening to this, you probably, my guess is that 99.9% of our audience has never even heard of this movie, let alone seen it. So to give kind of a little bit of a background on what we are actually talking about here, the movie is the titular Dark Avenger is Judge Paul Kane, who was attacked, presumed dead, and was scarred with acid. And what he's done is he's decided to kind of, I mean, ostensibly get revenge, but it's also just like, becoming a crime fighter in general. What he's actually trying to do is kind of murky. It's just basically kind of a MacGuffin to get us started into the plot. But he's got this, he walks around and it's like this mishmash of, like you said, a bunch of different types of characters in here. There's obviously some Batman influence in there. He's even got like a whole cave type thing. He's got he's got a fancy car. He's got his own Alfred of sorts in Ray Wong, who is this prisoner that I assume he put away, but he keeps breaking her out of prison so she can come and work on stuff with him.
She's on a work furlough with him.
Yeah, which makes me wonder because those work furloughs, they tend to be scrutinized. So I'm just like wondering what the hell kind of work furlough do they have for a dead judge or a presumed dead judge? And he's going around, and there's this, this corrupt police commissioner who's played by Robert Vaughn, and Hector Elizondo, who plays this this corrupt captain who's working with him. Ken Jenkins plays the district attorney, and he seems to be one of these people who's on the up and up, one of the few people who's, I guess in a way, he's probably like, the Harvey Dent, pre-Two-Face Harvey Dent for Paul Kane's Batman, in a way.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Two-Face, because you've almost got that Two-Face origin, having acid thrown on.
Well, it's very similar to, we're talking about old pulp characters. It's also very similar to the Black Bat, although in his case, he was blinded instead of being scarred. But also, wasn't the Avenger, the pulp hero, the Avenger, also a victim of scarring as well?
No, he sort of had like his face went white from shock when his family disappeared from memory. Yeah.
But yeah, there's kind of that Two-Face thing in there. Also, it's it's a bit of Darkman influence too. Well, I don't know. Darkman came out right before this, so I'm not sure how close together they were. But obviously, they're drawing on very similar source material. So to cover up the scarred portion of his face, he has like this metal mask, this kind of like skull type mask type thing. Which, I mean, I got it. It's funny. I've been re-listening to my buddy Anthony Desiato's Digging for Kryptonite podcast, and they were talking about the episodes of Smallville when they had the other DC heroes on there, and they were talking about the episodes where Cyborg appeared, and they were talking about how they made his cybernetic stuff all internal. They didn't do any external stuff, which was kind of a mixed bag, because on the one hand he's not recognizable in the same way, but on the other hand, given what the effects budget was on Smallville, if he had had like a metal piece over his eye, it probably wouldn't have looked too good. And I found myself thinking about that when I was looking at the Dark Avenger, because that face piece looks terrible. Like they should have,
Yeah.
they should have just gone like with a full face mask or something, because what
Yeah.
they did just doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Also, like it, you're sort of looking at it, like they do a few close-ups, and the skull sort of covers half his mouth, and you're looking at his mouth and going, "There's nothing wrong with his mouth," And every time, and I love the fact that every time someone takes the mask off, they're just like, "Ah!" and they're terrified, and they're catatonic and willing to, willing to go to jail rather than face that. And it's like, but we never actually see the face.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Which,
I was hoping we would get something about that at some point. Like maybe we'd see something about it, but they never show us anything.
No. Yeah, so that was a bit weird. Maybe that was like, maybe they'd planned when they went to series, they'd said, "Hey, we'll, Rick, can you do something really spectacular for us?" And he just ran out of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I was saying, if you're gonna get Rick Baker and you're not gonna let him cook, that's kind of disappointing.
Yeah. All it just says is the Judge Kane effects by Rick Baker, and I'm thinking, so he made the robot hand, maybe
the robot hand, yeah, which was kind of cool, but I found myself thinking about a lot of this stuff. They throw so much stuff in here, but then it's not developed. Like, how is this robot hand work? Like, it never becomes much of a plot point at all. Like, it's never really used to any effect, is it? Did I miss something?
Oh, he has a taser that he uses about 8 times. They set up a laser beam that he never uses. So there's a few bits and pieces like that. And also he does disguises. We see him in the police headquarters. Where was his name? I did write a note about this. But yeah, he uses a different. Oh, here it is, Gunderson in the police headquarters. That's Dark Avenger in disguise. And when he gets back, he's like, we see like 3 or 4 other masks, and it's like, oh well, he's clearly got other identities that he's out getting information through. But he just chills out in his Dark Avenger cave with his half skull mask on.
Yeah, and I found that the his lair, his kind of like his bat cave, for lack of a better term. Is it just me, or did it feel like the layout of it just felt a little strange? Because it's like they've got this, it felt very bare, but then they've got this desk here right in the middle. And I just felt like this feels like an odd placement for all this stuff. It didn't feel like they really did put much thought into how they're going to organize this stuff in a layout that made any sort of sense.
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, now that you mentioned, no, I don't think there was a great deal of sense in the layout of it. And you're sort of like, oh, yeah, and it's like, oh yeah, he's got like a lounge room over here, and it's like, yeah, this is a really odd setup.
Especially because we see that desk thing, but then there's like this platform where there's like some sort of like tech stuff or whatever that Ray's working on when we meet her. It's like, well, that seems like the perfect place where you'd have like the command center of it. So why do you put it in this tiny desk on the first level? It felt very strange. And I also I was also wondering too, just where is, and I understand it's, superhero stuff. There's suspension of disbelief for a lot of this, but how is he putting all this together? Like, it would have been nice to have some sort of mention about how he's funding this operation. Cause it's just, I mean, with Batman, there are all sorts of ways that you can kind of rationalize it, right? He's a billionaire, so there's a lot of and then when you get into stuff like the Batwing and all that, it's like, okay, now we're starting to script, because he probably didn't build a jet by himself, but
no.
But here it's just like, yeah. But here there's questions of, well, how are they putting all this whole operation together? Because it feels at the same time it's both like a shoestring budget that they're working on. Well, at the same time, it seems like they're able to get a lot out of it, but whatever budget they're working with.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They really didn't explain that. it's not like doesn't seem like the judge was, super rich. That he was just siphoning money from his family fortune or anything like that. And I don't know,
Right,
maybe he
because
had long-term plans for this.
I mean, because we do see that, we see that because he had a family before
Yeah,
his accident, and we get, it looks into their life every now and then. He's got a young
yeah,
daughter who she sees him at one point, and she
yeah,
freaks out, and there's this whole idea at the end where it's like daddy's watching over us. And I'm guessing if this had gone to series, they would have explored that relationship a little bit more over the course of the season. But
yeah.
obviously that's not really developed much here. And
No, and it seems like it's a
um,
bit of a trope when
yes,
your secret origin is that you've died. You've got to go and haunt your family because at no point is anyone ever going to recognize you and say maybe you're not as dead as I thought you were.
yeah, and he's not doing a good job being inconspicuous. Like he shows up at his daughter's birthday party, he gives her the
Yeah,
flowers, all this kind of stuff, and it's just like, and I'm thinking about this from the perspective of a father. Like,
yeah,
if I'd been in this situation where, it was my daughter, if I couldn't see my family,
yeah,
would I really? What would my reaction be? If I went, because you're creeping on your own family there. Like he
yeah,
shows up,
yes.
and what that mother, I don't know what she's thinking at that point.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, and I love the fact that the daughter just goes, she does. Everyone else seems to recognize him without his mask on, but she doesn't. Like, she just sees the scarred side. She doesn't he doesn't speak to her and say, "Hey, look, it's me."
Yeah,
Um,
and there's also no explanation, like, if they found out that he was still alive or anything like that, would they go after it? So there's a lot of the stuff that's just kind of like it happens because the tropes say it's supposed to happen that way, as opposed to
yeah.
there being a real story reason for a lot of things in this.
Oh, yeah, very much so. Uh, 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 yeah. Oh, I've lost my train of thought.
Well, that's actually a good spot to
Yeah.
take a break for ads, and then we'll be right back and we'll talk a little bit more about Dark Avenger. Since you're listening to this show, I already know you love watching superhero movies and TV shows, and you just might enjoy superhero comics. But how about superhero novels? I'm giving away 2 free superhero novels and 1 free superhero short story. Visit percivalconstantine.com/SCP to get access to Vanguard, Heroes Forged, the first novel in my own Avengers and X-Men inspired superhero novel series, and Ronin Born, my cyberpunk superhero novel set in a futuristic Japan. I'm also throwing in Fire and Lightning, a free prequel story to my new Power Rangers inspired superhero series Omega Knights. So visit percivalconstantine.com/SCP, those are just the letters SCP, to get started, or click on the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show. And we are back, and we're talking about The Dark Avenger with Brad Mengel. So one of the things I also wanted to talk about is one more comment I had about the about the mask is that I kept watching it every time because it always looks like it's on the verge of just falling right off his face. So I don't know, whatever sort of spirit gum they're using on there, that spirit gum is definitely doing a lot of work.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yeah, yeah. I sort of wish they'd done a bit more with that mask. It was as you say, a fuller face mask probably would have been
Yeah.
better.
Now, I did want to single out some of the performances in this because
Yeah,
one of the things I mentioned, before, that I think the biggest sin that any of these superhero movies can commit is they can be boring. And this
yeah,
is one of those ones that just drags. Like I was kind of dozing off a few times, and it gave me Morbius vibes in that, where like Morbius was not the ridiculous shit show I had actually hoped it would be from all the online it was just actually kind of boring and bland. Like it just didn't have anything. I felt very similar to this. Like it's just there's a lot of blandness to this, and it just doesn't
yeah,
really and there are a few bright spots. Like when Maggie Han first appears as Ray Wong, at first
yeah,
her kind of like affectation, the kind of way she's speaking, at first it kind of grated on me, but as we continued on with the movie, I felt like, oh wait, she actually knows this is supposed to be like camp, so she's trying to inject a little
yeah.
bit of fun. So I kind of got on board with it after that point, and I
Oh,
actually
yeah.
I found her kind of charming as I kept watching her in it.
Yeah, I love the bit where the police chief drives up and she's in the Dark Avenger mobile and she ducks down and she goes, "What am I doing? No, can't see you." And then she proceeds to get out of the car. Like, of course.
Yeah, so I thought she was kind of fun in it, and it gave me vibes of what's his name? Alan Rickman in Robin Hood, Prince of
Yes.
Thieves, where
Yes.
he just kind of like he's like, this movie is a piece of shit, so I'm just gonna chew all the scenery in sight. And I feel like Maggie Han had kind of a similar idea in her head when she was doing this movie.
Yeah. Like I said, she's a pretty legit actress. Like she was in The Last Emperor. So, it's sort of one of these things. You look at these, you look at some of these actors and you're going, you guys are legit. You're in Oscar-winning movies.
Mm-hmm. Well, Robert Vaughn, obviously, right? He was, Greg Henry is pretty legit in this too. Ken Jenkins, as we mentioned, Hector Elizondo, who he does a really good job, I felt too. Tony Amendola, who plays this crime boss at the beginning, he's been in, not like, a big name actor, but he's been in a ton of stuff throughout the years.
Oh yeah, he was Braytac in Stargate.
Yeah, he was also in, the Zorro, the Antonio Banderas Zorro movies, both of them playing different characters in each one. Like, a laundry list of credits. Like anything you've seen in like the past 40 years, there's a good shot that Tony Amendola was in something.
Yes. Wasn't he in like one of those Conjuring spin-offs, like Annabelle or something?
Probably. He's been in so many stuff. Yeah, he plays a priest a lot, I noticed in his credits. Because he's got that look. He's got the perfect look of like a Catholic priest. So I think he's definitely been cast in that. He's definitely been typecast that way a lot. And I felt like with a lot of these performances, and unfortunately, I think the weakest performance of all of them is the main character, is Lee Lawson as Paul Kane. Like he's got like no personality really. He's got like no kind of gravitas. Like the closest thing we ever get is when Ray is asking him about like his kind of stuff he likes to do for fun and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like that's like the closest we ever get to anything, but it's just like he's got this very, and it's like, dry toast personality.
Well, he's as sober as a judge.
Soberer.
But I must admit, he's got a nice voice for that sort of, villain. I accuse you of doing this, and I find you guilty. He sort of had a nice voice for that. I really liked his voice in those parts.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
other than that, there's nothing really there's nothing to latch on with him though. Like that's what I felt like. You can have a character like that, but there's got to be something there for the audience to latch onto, for them to have some way to connect to him. And they try it with the family, but it just never really that never lands. And it's made all the worse by the fact that the actress who plays his wife, Deborah Engel, she was terrible. I'm sorry, she was just the worst.
Yeah, and look, the daughter wasn't much better, but she was a child actress. I was willing to.
Yeah, I cut a lot of leeway for her in that, but Deborah Engel, she's an adult actress, and like, obviously the stuff she's given with isn't that good, but even still, like the delivery is just god awful in that.
Yeah. But I think you're talking about Frankensteining it. I'm almost wondering if it was like 3 half-hour episodes that they've Frankenstein together, because it almost plays out like that. Mm-hmm. With you've got that first 20 minutes with that the witness subplot, then you've got 20 minutes on the Grim Reaper, and then about 20 minutes in, that whole plot just seems to take a left turn with discovering the real Grim Reaper is well, I'm not going to I'm going to spoil a 30-year-old movie. Is Greg, what's his name?
Greg Henry, Colin Tremaine.
Greg Henry's character. And you're going, and it's like he just goes from I'm a legitimate doctor to crazy man.
Yeah.
Well, where'd that come from? And his sister, who's a fellow doctor, she's like, "Yes, I'll work with you," and then just goes, "Oh, yes, I've known all along that my brother was the serial killer," and it seems like she's covered up for him about 3 or 4 times as they've moved around. Although it's sort of implied, it's not really stated.
Hmm.
She's just like, you need to stop because they're going to figure out that it's not the guy you framed.
Yeah, and I felt like the times when the movie interested me the most were actually not the times when Paul Kane is on screen at all. It's but like the stuff with Ken Jenkins, like he does a pretty decent job in this. Like the stuff when he's,
Yeah.
when they're talking strategy, when they're in the courtroom, I thought like he's doing really good in this. Um
Yes.
or the conversations between the commissioner and the police captain, Robert Vaughn and Hector Elizondo. I thought that worked really well too, because
Yeah.
Elizondo has kind of this. He's not quite in camp territory, but he's kind of like skirting the edge, and it was fun to
Yeah.
watch him in those scenes.
Yeah. And I quite like Tony Amendola with when he's talking to the hostage and he's going, we used to tell ghost stories, and
Mm.
doing the cool whistle and that. And he was like, yeah, I thought that was really good. I like that.
Yeah, he did a good job with those things too. And then, obviously, Maggie Han, I think she steals the show. Like
Oh, definitely.
she's the only reason that the scenes with Lee Lawson are watchable basically, because her taking the piss out of him is kind of like, she was speaking to me a lot, I felt.
Yeah, I think he was, taking this as a very serious, grimdark uh, role, and yeah, I don't think he was, quite playing it quite right. But yeah, like I said, I thought he had a really good voice for doing those, those terrifying, the ungodly bit.
And this is where the comparison I wanted to make to Darkman comes in, because Darkman, and I think in big part because of Sam Raimi directing it, is it knew what kind of movie it was. And
Yeah,
Sam Raimi, clearly he had made it clear to the actors in this what kind of movie they were making. And the Liam Neeson in that, he is just full on scenery chewing mode. And
oh yeah,
um I can't remember the guy who plays the villain Durant, but him as well.
oh
The
yeah.
crooked real estate guy.
Yeah,
I can't remember his name, but anyway. But all of them, they are just they're full on scenery chewing. They know that this is pseudo
mm,
camp. It's in camp territory, and they just cut loose on that, and
yeah.
it's a lot of fun to watch. Like the pink elephant scene is one that stands out in my mind.
Well, that's the other thing is you don't see any bitterness or resentment from Lee Lawson. It's not like, look, my face has been scarred. I can't see my family. I'm cut off from all of this. And he's very clinical. There's no anger there.
Exactly. Yeah,
Um,
he's way too stoic
yeah,
and that makes it impossibly hard to relate to his character at all. And that stoicism really holds us back, because we have no emotional connection to the main character. We have nothing. There's no like affectations about the main character that we can latch onto. It's like, okay, well, he's a bastard, or he's, or whatever, but at least he's got this, this quirk or something that would at
yeah,
least be entertaining to watch. But he's got none of that. I mean, he's got the voice, and like you mentioned, and that's about it. There's nothing else he
yeah,
really has.
yeah. Although I thought the car was kind of cool.
Oh yeah, the car looked great, and I think maybe that's probably where most of the budget went to, is the car.
Well, it took me forever to figure out what car that was because I'm not a car guy. And in the end, I'm searching, and if you search for anything for Dark Avenger, you're more than likely to get a Marvel related link. But in the end, I took photos. I was playing it on the screen and taking photos and doing Google searches. And in the end, the Google search said, "Look, this looks a bit like a 1989 Chevy Lumina." And I went, "Okay, that tracks." It sort of looked at it, and yeah, that looks about right. The timing's about right. It makes sense that the Chevy might have given them a car to play with in the hopes that it did for the Lumina like the Knight Rider did for Trans Am's.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess just kind of, I I don't know. Most of this movie is just kind of really kind of boring, I felt. And
Mhm.
and if you do compare it to a lot of these other movies that were coming out at that time, and I feel, and I did get sense, again, talking about Maggie Han and like Hector Elizondo, I was also thinking of the Phantom movie because, Billy
No,
Zane and Catherine Zeta-Jones, and that they both knew what kind of movie they were making, and they played right into their parts. I feel like you get the same sense with Maggie Han and Hector Elizondo, Tommy
yeah,
Amendola as well. They are, they're kind of camping it up a little bit, and it works very
yeah,
well. But everybody
yeah,
else, it feels like they're making something a lot more serious, and those two halves don't really fit together. And this story itself, the kind of budget they have, all this
yeah,
kind of stuff, it doesn't really fit for. And I think it would have been a lot better if they just kind of like leaned into more of the fun aspects of it. Kind of
yeah,
like Black Scorpion did, because Black Scorpion
yes.
was not like an award-winning movie or anything like that, but it had
No.
this kishy, fun quality to it.
Yeah, well, that was the same thing we mentioned with it, that um, what's her name? Joan Severance was playing Black Scorpion like a 1990s bad girl, and not the Batman 66 type character that she probably should have been. Whereas Michelle Lintel, she got it, and she played more into uh, that campy mindset.
Yeah, yeah,
And look,
yeah.
and that maybe had it have gone to pilot, had it have gone to series, they may have recast the judge and got an actor who was a little more into that.
I mean, I think
Although,
they would have had to.
yeah, yeah. Although I don't know if they would have, because Hollywood not very good at taking the right lessons from things. They would have went Batman 1989 was a major success, dark and gritty, so therefore everything must be dark and
Well, that was the lesson that they did take from
gritty.
it. Um, but and I, you did see this with a lot of the stuff that came out after Batman 66 is that you see that there is this obvious feel of a push and pull between something that's more serious and something that's a little bit more camp. And
Yeah.
I mean, you look at, again, going back to the Mantis, you look at the Mantis pilot and compared to the TV series that followed, they are night and day. Like they're completely
Yeah.
different. Like the TV show, it plays more like, Black Panther in almost kind of like a more pulpy, it's like a pulpy version of Black Panther. And then when
Yeah.
they got to the series, they decided to flip it and lean more towards the Batman stuff, and it didn't. And they removed like all the political stuff that was, because that first movie was actually pretty damn political, but they cut all that
Oh.
out. They replaced all the black actors with white actors, and they just they completely cut it off at the knees compared to like that original pilot was actually very. I was surprised at how much more relevant it was compared to. And then when I went back and I watched the TV series that followed, I'm like, ooh. And then you got like invisible
Yeah.
dinosaurs and all this kind of stuff.
It's been a while since I've watched Mantis. I think I watched it when it came out back in the day. Was it about 93, 94?
It's 94, I want to say.
Yeah. I watched it when it came out then, but I haven't seen it anywhere since then. So
No, it did get a DVD release at some point, and I think the DVD
yeah,
release also has the pilot. Of course, there are alternate means you can get to finding it if you have trouble finding the DVD, because I'm not sure if the DVD is
yeah,
even still in print. I
yeah,
have never seen it shown up on streaming anywhere, but it's possible it's on like Tubi or one of these things.
yeah, yeah. I might have to do a bit of a search when we're finished here.
Yeah. Um, any other things you wanted to mention about Dark Avenger? I think I kind of exhausted what few notes I had about it.
Yeah, it was nice to see a reference to Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse, which was created, and you can hear the air quotes in there by Bob Kane.
Hmm.
So it's almost like that nice little haha Batman reference. Um, what else is there? Oh, there's one bit at the end when he's dropping off the guy, the mental patient who ends up saving. He goes, I don't know how to thank you. And I'm half expecting him to go, look, one day I will come to you and I will ask you for a favor. and you'll do it. I was expecting that, and he just goes, "No, you go live your life. Just live a good life. That's all I ask for you. Do the favor that helps you down the track." I was sort of expecting that to happen, a bit like what was his name? Mr. Chappell in
The
Vengeance
Shadow.
Unlimited. Yeah, yeah, that was the other one. I'm sitting there going, I'm sure there was a third one. I remember. Oh, well, that's the other thing. The Shadow was actually referred to as the Dark Avenger in the original pulps.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Will Murray put out a book just recently called The Dark Avenger: The Secret History of the Shadow, or something along those lines. And I was looking, and I was like, I wonder if this was in the original pulps or not. So I actually reached out to Will, and he goes, "No, they used it in the original pulps. They just didn't capitalize it." And I went, "Well, yeah, that's cool." So it furthers my theory that they were riffing on the Shadow a bit there too.
Oh, I think so. This probably feels like a case where, well, because the shadow rights, I think there was a bit of a battle to get them at that time.
Yeah.
Because after Batman came out, and I think this is my theory. I've never read anything to back this up, but my theory as to why we got so many pulp inspired projects in the '90s was because of the success of Batman, and these studios wanted to capitalize on the Batmania craze, but most of the other superheroes, either their rights were tied up or it was too challenging to do in live action with access to what they had at the time. So instead you had a lot of these pulp characters which would smaller budgets would work fine with them. The rights would obviously be cheaper because they're not as in demand. You're talking about characters that have been out of print or out of the public eye at least for decades at that point. So it'd be much easier to kind of capitalize on these things. And I know like the Shadow was a big one at the time because Sam Raimi, I think that's why he ended up making Darkman, because he was trying to get the rights to the Shadow, but he couldn't. They wouldn't. They thought he was too. The show's Hollywood thinking at the time. They thought he wasn't a sure enough bet for a superhero movie, which then he would go on to make the Spider-Man trilogy. So it shows how forward thinking they were. And so I'm guessing this is probably a case where CBS, maybe they tried to get the rights to the Shadow and they couldn't get them, so then they're like, well, let's do this thing instead, and let's do this kind of like mishmash, because it's got a lot of those. We see some of that, like there's that's why I thought they were going to go into they're lean into like a network type of thing with. I thought the same thing when he was talking to that patient at the end, that he was going to lean into this whole thing of I'm going to ask a favor of you or something along those lines, and it was going to start to build up a network, which would have been interesting, would have been a lot better,
and would have made a lot more sense in that he's trying to get those feelers out.
Exactly. Yeah. And also too with like the district attorney, I thought there might have been something going on there, like there would be some sort of relationship established, but nothing, none of that. We don't get any of that kind of stuff. So it feels like, Ken Jenkins, district attorney, is just kind of walled off from everything else that's happening here, which felt like a missed opportunity too, because then you also have a chance for some character stuff there. Like, if Kane was a judge, then he would have interacted with Jenkins' character Underwood. And so there could have been some sort of relationship. They were friends or something like that, or they're golf buddies or whatever, like something there that we could have built up on and would have given us something else to latch onto Kane's character in. But they don't go that route at all.
No. There's as you say, a lot of missed opportunities. Almost like I felt like they could have cut out that witness subplot and given themselves a bit more space to do these things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. I think that would have been so much better. Or even just even cutting down the family stuff, because that stuff just completely drags. And it feels like it doesn't contribute a lot here. And I think it would have been, especially because you've got a much better actor in Ken Jenkins compared to Deborah Engel and Jenny Drugan, who play the wife and daughter. I mean, Ken Jenkins, just by virtue of being on screen with him, probably would have elevated Lee Lawson's performance.
Yeah, and giving him a couple of scenes with having a bit of a play with Hector Elizondo's character, or the commission, with Ken Jenkins, or even Lee Lawton proper interactions would have been interesting to see too. I think.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. I think that's all we have to say about Dark Avenger, unless there's anything
Yeah.
else you have to mention about it.
Well, the only other thing was I did find there is another character called the Dark Avenger by T.J. Moore. He's got this 6-book series called Tales of the Dark Avenger that came out in 2007. I thought, oh, maybe he's done a continuation or a fan thing. But no, it's actually a completely original character as far as I can tell, and he's made a couple of like half-hour movies that you can buy from him.
Oh yeah, I see it now.
Yeah. But yeah, this is a
Based,
completely different
based on
character.
this, yeah, and based on what I'm seeing on IMDb, it doesn't look like we're in very not very cinematography, not very great cinematography or even
Well,
graphic
they've got
design for that
trailers.
matter.
There's trailers for the two movies on YouTube, and one of them's in 3D. And I was like,
Okay.
oh. It's like, yeah, 2010, 3D has sort of run its course, I thought.
But I am looking too. There is some similarities to it, just like when Jerry won't talk,
Yeah,
DA investigator Robert Steele becomes the mass vigilante known as the Dark Avenger. So there
yeah.
is, we're dealing with the same kind of DNA here, I think, at the very least.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But yeah, this is one of those characters too that this is where I get on my little rant about studios holding on to these IPs, because
Oh, yeah.
this is the type of character that CBS is never going to touch this thing again, right?
No,
Never in a million years would they ever touch this thing again. So it's just
yeah,
like, but I would actually be interested. This is the kind of thing where I think it'd be fun to take this character that is just in this kind of throwaway thing and see about
yeah.
doing something interesting with him. And this is where I kind of
Oh,
feel
yeah.
like that, where I wish there were term limits on these copyrights beyond, a lot less than 95 years, because I mean, I think it would be really cool to see someone go into this and approach this character, especially with all this stuff we've gotten in the recent years about police corruption and police violence and all
Oh,
that.
yeah, that would be, in getting something, like a sequel movie. Yeah, like what do they call it? Requels.
Right. Yeah. Or
I
just,
think.
someone else just rebooting the character and rebooting him
Yeah,
in novels or comics or anything like that. This is the kind of thing that I think there would be a lot of room to do, because CBS is not making any money off of this. They're not,
no,
airing it anywhere. They're not selling any DVDs of it. So it's just this thing that they're
yeah,
squatting on. And I think this is one of the things I hate about IP squatting, is that, stuff that is maybe the original one wasn't very well done, wasn't really thought
mm,
out. There's some seeds there that you could work with and you could play around with that could be interesting. I
yeah.
mean, even, Ray Wong, the whole idea of prison labor and all that kind of stuff. You could work in criticism of that
Oh,
into
yeah.
it. Like, there's a lot of things you can do with this type of concept, but CBS isn't going to let the rights go anytime soon, I don't think.
I don't think. Oh, look, I think I think their bots troll through YouTube and they go, oh, yeah, we're not even going to bother trying to copyright
Exactly.
strike that and get it off.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, Brad, thanks again for coming on. And
No
before
worries.
we finish up, why don't you tell people where they can find you?
I have a blog, Poppy Brad's blog. I really don't do any of the social media stuff. So yeah, that's about the only place where I am.
Okay, well, check out the blog,
Yeah.
and we'll have a link to that in the show notes. And as for us, superherocinephiles.com is the website. You can go there, and you can also find out about being a guest yourself if you're interested. And you can find us on the socials. These days, I'm on Blue Sky a lot. So you go to Blue Sky, look up Super Cinema Pod. I'm on there a lot these days. And it's, guys, if you guys aren't on Blue Sky, at least at the time of this recording, we're recording this at the end of November, and it's got very early Twitter vibes, and it just feels like a very nice place to be. It's not as kind of contentious as Threads or Facebook, and certainly not as much as Twitter these days. But yeah, so Super Cinema Pod on Blue Sky is probably the best place to go. But we are also on Instagram and Threads as well. Super Cinema Pod on both of those, and the Facebook page Superhero Cinephiles. So you can check us out there. And that does it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Superhero Cinephiles is produced by me, Percival Constantine. The show is created by myself and the late, great Derek Ferguson, our host emeritus. Visit us on the web at superherocinephiles.com to listen to past episodes or find out how you can be a guest yourself. Support the show by visiting our advertiser links or click the Buy Me a Coffee link on the website to make a one-time donation. We are Super Cinema Pod on both Instagram and Blue Sky, so please be sure to follow us. We'd also appreciate it if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and share us with your friends.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.